and welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH podcast. I'm Louie Butko, and on today's show, we're checking in with what has been going on at the Ontario Legislature. And to do that, we bring in our Queen's Park producer, Rath. And Randy, I've heard a rumor going around. There's a pretty big Queen's Park shindig happening today. What's the word on that?
Yeah, it's the Queen's Park Press Gallery annual spring fling. It's completely off the record. Some people argue about whether it should be off the record or not. You have the party leaders go in and they present videos, they make speeches. It's a fun time, and as I say, it's off the record, and there's a fair bit of debate about whether it should be or not.
Let's talk about the Queen's Park, the press. You've been there for a few years. How have you found kind of this crop of reporters? You know, we get the reporters from other organizations try to push the premier. Sometimes feel a bit combative at times. How would you describe what we're seeing now in terms of the way Queen's Park is reported?
Well, the press gallery is very aggressive now, and it always has been. It's just that it's really sort of not contrived, but it's like a coordinated attack on the government over a certain issue, and any issue, and that didn't really used to happen that much. Somebody would get a story, they would do it, and now it seems that the press gallery piles on, and in some ways it's helpful to bring stories to the public, and other times I look at the story of the day or things that people do stories on, I think, why bother? That's how the system works.
And that's what I found too, is that sometimes we'll see a story that gets out there, and all the line of questioning goes that way, right? And I've seen it in sports where there are some people who are afraid to ask questions, some people can't find their own story. But to your point about the combativeness of it, is it not true though that this government specifically has had one of the more quieter, harder to get direct responses, harder to get one-on-one interviews? I mean, for the combativeness that the press gallery has been having to show, a lot of that is because of what this government does and the way they treat the media sometimes.
Oh yeah, they like to hide. They don't like to come out and talk to us. And it used to be I could phone a minister and say, look, I want to ask you a question about this, or this, and they would say, yeah, sure, no problem. Meet me in the hallway, come up to my office, whatever. Now it's sort of like, oh no, we're not available. We'll be available sometime in the next 6 months. So it's quite frustrating at times. But I also find that when ministers do a scrum, now, they're asked the same question time after time after time after time. I'm sorry, I just got a call from somebody that I'm hanging up on. But they're asked the same question time after time after time after time, and this thing won't shut up. Okay, it's off now. I'm shutting it down.
You got
it. You'll have a scrum, where we all gather around the minister and bark out questions. And I find that people aren't listening to what the minister is saying, or whoever we're scrumming is saying, that people have preconceived ideas of what their question is going to be or what their newsrooms have assigned them to ask. And they ask that regardless of where the scrum is going. And, that is somewhat a result of the inability of us to get them, that they're not available to us. So when you get a chance to ask the questions, you just go blah, blah with the question, and you're not listening to what has been said before, and if the story has advanced in that particular scrum. Now, a lot of stuff they're being completely secretive about, like all the Greenbelt stuff, Ford taking money from developers or allegations of that. It's very serious stuff. And, it's in a way understandable why the media is so aggressive and trying to hold the province to account, or the government to account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I've tried to get PCMPPs on this show. I had a no-show in an interview once with a PCMPP. We know their policy on debates. We saw that in the last election cycle. They don't like doing debates. Does this come from the top? Does this come from Doug Ford, who says, my message is king, and ministers just follow what I'm doing? Because, like you say, it is his cabinet, right? He can kind of direct the message the way he wants.
All direction for speaking to the media comes to the Premier's office now. That's just the way it is, and it has been since essentially Dalton McGuinty was the Premier. But I think that this government is particularly bad or secretive, or they just don't want to talk, and they won't make themselves available. And I'm not sure, but I would suppose that the ministers have to check with the Premier's office before they talk. And it used to be that ministers wouldn't stand for it. If they wanted to talk to the media, they would just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Since we've last talked, Randy, there was a by-election up in Milton. The polls were showing that it was going to be close. I think the Liberals had a bit of an edge in the polling. Then we get to election night, and we see none of that meant anything. How big of a blow was that to Bonnie Crombie? How big of a win was that for Doug Ford in Milton a few weeks ago?
Well, it's a real kick in the head for Bonnie Crombie, I would think. It doesn't bode well for her. That was right next door to where she was a mayor. And
there was some discussion she might actually go for that seat too, right?
Oh, she must be really, really happy that she never ran in that running. But there's it's really good for Ford. And there was low voter turnout. And I've heard people criticize the low voter turnout and say that it wasn't representative of what people think because of that. Well, I've had it argued to me that if it had been a higher voter turnout, it would have been just a greater plurality for the Conservatives, that they would have won by even more, and that people were comfortable enough that our Tories were comfortable enough that they were going to win, that they didn't bother to go out and show, and the other parties supporters didn't care. So they didn't go out. And so what it said to the Ford government, and what people in the Premier's office have told me that it said to them, was people are satisfied with what we're doing. There's no great public outcry. There is a public outcry about, green belt, healthcare, education, you name it. There's outcry about it. But they're interpreting this to mean that generally the population, the people in Ontario, are happy with the way they're governing.
What sort of lessons do you think Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals can take from that Milton by-election? Like you said, if that was a test, they failed it. They didn't get the seat. They didn't come close to a passing grade. What sort of lesson would you think that Crombie and the Liberals can take from that, or was this, like you say, was this a one-off? Because there's going to be another election in a few years, and Crombie's going to want some seats. What can she learn?
Well, they have to get their grassroots organizations back to what they were pre-Doug Ford winning. I mean, most of winning an election is a ground game. You have to have people to get out the vote. You have to, the people that are running have to really, really communicate with the constituents. And I don't think that was really a problem in Milton. I think it was more that the people just wanted the Tories, and they were fine with it. Plus, they're building a highway out there. People out there like highways. Not everybody's going to jump on a GO train.
Zee Hamid, too, as well, in terms of a candidate, right? I mean, this was a hand-picked conservative, candidate who was previously a liberal or had some liberal ideas for sure, was a city councillor in Milton, a town councillor, whatever that is up there. The candidates matter, too, right? I think that's an important lesson in this one is, no disrespect to the liberal candidate who had some name recognition, but, the candidates who are running in these elections really matter. And would you agree that maybe something the Liberals can learn for this next cycle?
Well, what Doug Ford took from that is he said, I'm not a hard party guy. I can work with anybody. And just because this guy used to be a Liberal, that doesn't matter to me. He sees things the way that we, meaning the Conservatives at Queen's Park, see things. So he's a good candidate for us, and he was very effective at getting his message out. And I mean, the Tories were really worried. They had, the day of the by-election, they had all of the ministers out there and their staff getting out the vote, knocking on doors, saying, come on, let's go vote. They had lists of, come on, you're going to go vote. We'll drive you. And they really put an effort into it. And I imagine Bonnie did the same. I've just been, brought up to date more on how the Tories conducted themselves out there.
Well, and that's the other point. I mean, we've talked about this a couple times, and everybody I've had on the show, Bonnie Crombie herself, how is she going to make a name for herself? And again, this goes back to a bit of a failing for the Liberals. Like, here's your one chance to really make an impact. That's a great image that you can show. Bonnie Crombie holding the new MPP's hand on stage, and we're getting our way back. Like, do you think, is it back to the drawing board for Crombie? And again, and all of this, we haven't mentioned the actual leader of the opposition, and that being Marit Stiles. I mean, it seems like with everything the Conservatives are doing, the NDP and the Liberals are just falling farther and farther into the background. And it seems like Ontarians, they're content with what's happening now.
Well, first, the Tories, Doug Ford and his crew, have been really, really successful in crowning Bonnie Crombie the queen of the carbon tax. That attack has worked. And there is great animosity towards Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax. And the way prices are going, I don't know how much of an effect the carbon tax has had on inflation, but it's being perceived as that among the public. And, she is still linked at the hip to Trudeau and the federal Liberals. So she's got to somehow break that. And as far as the NDP go, excuse me, they just haven't been an effective opposition. Nothing that they've done has really, really stuck. And I sometimes scratch my head when question period comes out. They'll be, they will hold a press conference in the media studio and, just down the hall from the chamber, and they'll discuss a very important issue, like say a health issue. And then they won't ask about it during question period. They'll go on to a story that's 3-4 week old, and you think to yourself, well, how am I supposed to do this story? All I have is what was said by the opposition in the media studio. The health minister very rarely comes out to scrum, so they're not going to put her up to scrum today when there's a contentious, serious, real issue. So how am I supposed to cover that story when I don't have, if Bonnie Crombie is asking a question in the House, the health minister has no choice but to stand up and answer it, or the parliamentary assistant to the health minister.
Well, you and I have talked about this on, assignment days where I'm getting my story for the morning, and we're like, I don't think the NDP are going to ask about that. And it's like, well, why not? Like, this isn't an old story. Like, this is what we'd want to know. You mentioned the highway up in Milton. Of course, Doug Ford and his transportation minister were there making a GO train announcement during that by-election. Pramit Sarkaria, again, very busy today, announcing some new rules when it comes to kind of an overhaul of the justice system when it comes to car thefts and drinking and driving. How is this being received at Queen's Park today?
Well, it's being received well. I mean, they've done a marvelous job of promoting it. They give it to everybody early so you can get it on your morning show. It becomes the news of the day, and they're real talkers. If you say you're gonna take people's driver's license away forever, that's a talker. People talk about it in the office, in a bar, whatever. But you have to question, if somebody's desperate enough or a gangster and they're out stealing cars, do they really care about their driver's license? Like, it's
go on their permanent record, right? It's like, I mean, that's like the threat from high school. It's like, it's going to be on your permanent record. It's like, well, the record's already this thick. What's another page to it?
They're willing to go to the penitentiary. So, a driver's license suspension isn't going to deter you if you're desperate enough to kick somebody's door in, stuff a gun in their mouth and say, give me your car keys. It's kind of lame. But the one today, I already thought that you did lose your license forever if you killed somebody when you were drunk, If not, well, you should. So,
well, I've heard this in court cases. Yeah, I've heard this in court cases. Sorry, Randy, where the judge says, "I wish I could take away your license forever, but I can't. That's not what the law says."
Yeah, I didn't know that. I've learned something today.
I learn something every day. I learn multiple things every day, Randy.
The Sicaria and his people have done a marvelous job of carrying the news of the day. Like, you turn on the radio, you turn on the TV, and there it is. If you're drunk, you're going to lose. If you kill somebody, you're going to lose your license forever. And also, they're extending the time that you lose your license if you're charged with impaired from 3 days to 7 days, and from 7 days to 14 days.
More mandatory interlock ignition systems, I think, is in there as well. Let's talk about Sarah Jama, an independent MPP for Hamilton Centre. The one thing I've noticed was with MPP Jama, and it was something you had been talking about this week too, when she kind of tabled a motion, there was some sort of, Queen's Park ignorance, I want to say, and what was she doing? And there was some, confusion on what she was confused on what she was doing. It felt like. Is that just the consequence of being a young MPP, unaffiliated with any party? Is that she's trying to learn all this as she goes? Like, what have you made of how Sarah Jama has handled this independent MPP streak she's been on?
Well, she's doing okay. I mean, the censor means that she won't be recognized by the speaker, so she can't speak in the House to anything. She can be recognized by the clerk, which means she can table her motion, but the Kafia motion, but she has no mechanism. Like, to table it, you essentially just take it to the clerk. The clerk signs something, signs it, whatever. So you have a record that it's been tabled. But I think that where Sarah sort of was confused was with the terminology, because you could table a motion, but then you need to move the motion so that it can be debated. And you can't move a motion without being recognized by the speaker. So I think that the confusion came, she was mad about something that we had tweeted, and what we had said was that she has no mechanism to move the motion forward. But she said, oh, no, I tabled the motion before I got kicked out the other day, which in fact she did. So, good for her. What I worry about Sarah, and if she's serving her constituents well, is that there have been many, many, many votes that she could have participated in, and she hasn't participated in the majority of the votes that she's been eligible to participate in.
Interesting.
So, that's sort of Queen's Park inside baseball, but
I think it's and it's important, I would say, just because, obviously she's a Hamilton MPP. She represents a number of our viewers and listeners here. So, it's just interesting. And you wonder what being affiliated, like having those resources that come with being a part of the NDP to help her through these steps that she finds herself in. This next week, constituency week, and then they're back for 3-4 weeks, and then they're off for the summer. Yeah. So what do you hope? What do you think we'll see? Do you think Doug Ford has a couple of more of these announcements in his sleeve for the next few weeks? I mean, if it's constituency week, we could see people going back to their home ridings with big checks and all that stuff. What are you expecting to see before we break for the summer?
I would see a bunch of different of announcements. I don't know how big they'll be, but there's going to be announcements. I don't know if we'll see anything huge like we saw at Port Colborne the other day. Those are mega announcements, and I was reflecting on those, and it seems to me that Ontario is putting all their eggs in one basket when it comes to electric cars. I mean, we're really staking a lot of money, and our children's money on these things working and being successful and being in demand, and so far they're not. So if some other technology comes along and takes over this, you have to wonder if this is really, really wise, spending billions and billions of dollars on something that if you look at the States, there's no demand for them.
We mentioned the popularity of Trudeau earlier. What is Doug Ford? When you see him in the background there, and some of us in the newsroom were talking about this, when you see him just standing there, he doesn't really know what to do. Like, he shouldn't smile because then it's a picture of him smiling with Trudeau. Like, how does he handle that? How do provincial politics and federal politics, when they do mix like this, how is it handled from inside baseball perspective? Because there's some awkwardness. Obviously, you represent two different parties. You have two very different ideologies. How do these things stay as cordial as they do?
Well, I think that Doug has staked his reputation on, I can work with anybody and I will work with anybody. I don't care about political parties. I just want to get the job done. I want to build things. I want to invest money. I want things to work for the people of Ontario, and I'm willing to work with the federal government, even if they are Liberals. And, I mean, traditionally, if you have a Liberal government in Ottawa, Conservative governments get elected in Ontario. So, to a certain extent, it's to his benefit to have a federal government that's Liberal. And with Poilievre, I have yet to see Doug have any communication, camaraderie, anything with him. Excuse me. The only thing that they've done is recently they've taken up the axe the tax chant. So they're starting to say axe the tax. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens when there's a federal election. If the Conservatives win, it's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch the way that they deal with the provincial government.
Well, and again, we started this conversation about that Milton by-election. Of course, that by-election called because one of Doug Ford's cabinet ministers was poached by the Conservatives. And if there's a federal election 2025 or earlier, I'm sure he's not going to be one of the only ones. These are very popular MPPs. I'm sure there's more than a handful that have to be looking at their chances in a federal election and think, hey, forget Queen's Park, I might be able to go to Ottawa. Is that a fair assessment? Because Conservatives are pretty popular right now.
I hit the table again. I think that's very fair because, it's pretty clear now that the Conservatives are going to win in Ottawa, and it's not clear that Doug Ford's government can do a three-peat. So these guys might be thinking, well, hey, I can get a term or two in Ottawa, and then my political. And also, one thing that's critical to remember for people that want to be MPs and not MPPs is MPPs do not have a pension, and MPs have a very good pension. So your personal self-interest would be to get out of Queen's Park and get into Ottawa.
Will make the next couple of years definitely very interesting. Speaking of a couple of years, Randy, you were recently here at our studios at For Innovation, taking a trip down memory lane. I don't want to spoil anything on that trip, but what was that like for you to kind of to go down memory lane and talk about all those the good times you've had here at CH?
Well, Louie, I've had some really good times at CHCH, and we people don't understand how truly much of a family we are there. Like, I was married to a woman whose dad was the first news director at CHCH. And her dad lived on the same street as the guy that was the head cameraman at CHCH for like the first 20 years that I was there. So it's truly a family, Like, my father-in-law, Ron Ellis, just passed away at 95. And he was the original CHCH news director. So it put a lump in my throat. It also made me very happy to be there and remember.
And talking about this again, starting with that Queen's Park Gallery, it's a little bit different here, like I said, with our independentness of CHCH versus some of those big players when it comes to the Toronto media scene. Randy, always love your insights and analysis on what's happening at Queen's Park. Thank you for making the time today, my friend. Really appreciate it.
Can I just say one more thing?
Go for it.
I think that we do different stories than the so-called big players, and people love it. Like, some of the most popular stories we've ever done, like we did a story on the fattest cat that has ever been in the Lincoln Humane Society, and people loved it, or the one where Adam, the giant zucchini. Giant zucchini. Like, That's hilarious stuff, right? And we do that better than anybody else. People in Toronto media, they don't let their hair down enough, you know? Like, they would say, if you said, mine all went down. But if they said, you're going to go do a story on this giant fat cat, they get like peed about it, right? Whereas we're like, yeah, okay, I'm in. So, there's a difference between CHCH and everybody else. There really is.
Well put. Randy, like I said, always appreciate it. Thanks for making the time, my friend.
Okay, take care, Louie. Anytime.
My thanks to Randy Rath. He is the Queen's Park producer for us here at CHCH for joining me today. And my thanks to you as well, because we could not do the show without your support. Make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you, including Sportsline with Bubba O'Neill on Monday. He had a very, very special guest. You're going to want to check out Monday's show. Some people calling it one of the best episodes of Sportsline ever done. So go check out Monday's episode of Sportsline, and while you're there, check out the rest of them. The rest of them are pretty good too, but Monday's the best ever, is what I've been told. My thanks to Mike Corson for directing today's show, and one more time, thank you for joining us from all of us here at CHCH. I'm Louie Butko. Have a great day.